Our next conversation is going to be on alcohol, drugs, and substance abuse in this country. We are joined by Dr. Anthony Omerikwa. He is the CEO of the National Authority for the Campaign Against Alcohol and Drug Abuse, NACADA. Dr. Omerikwa, good morning.
Good morning to you, Latif.
Welcome to Kenya's biggest conversation, the hot seat of the Situation Room. Are you comfortable?
I'm privileged to be here.
Very good.
Yes.
It's good to have you here. So, Dr. CT will also give you the day's proverb. Every week, he goes to an African country, brings proverbs from that country.
Yes.
The last 3 weeks, this being the third, he has been in landlocked countries of Africa. We've been asking people to tell us a landlocked country in Africa. So, don't say Uganda, don't say Sudan, don't say Rwanda. Those ones have been said. Which other one?
Zambia.
We're going to find your homework.
Alipita geography. People studying geography. He passed his geography.
Very well.
Yes.
Very well.
Unlike some people who happily tell you, landlocked, South Africa, you realize, okay.
Kwisha.
Yeah, this person didn't quite do geography very well, but at least it's a country in Africa.
At least even Stanley Livondo knows Zambia is landlocked.
And he also knows they have a military hospital.
He built it after all.
Yes.
Touche.
Okay.
Yes.
The proverb. This is one of the richest countries on the planet in terms of natural mineral wealth, and it's one of the poorest. If you're looking at poverty as the number one poorest, number two poorest, them number three poorest.
In the world.
World. And they say it is one of the worst countries for young people to live in. The Human Development Index said this country here, if you're young, you have a problem. Anyway, why don't we look at the proverb?
Or the country.
For the country.
You still haven't said the country.
The country is called Central African Republic. Most countries are called Kenya. Then you say the Republic of Kenya.
Yes.
This one, they didn't wait for you. They told you themselves. The Central African Republic. Yes. If you show off your strength, battle will find you.
If you show off your strength, battle will find you. What's your interpretation of this?
I want to look at it from the vanity perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. If you spread yourself out there in vain, I think you'll have haters. That's my perspective.
You put it very well. Right.
Haters will follow you.
You flaunt it and see.
Flaunt and haters come.
Yes.
Haters gonna hate.
Yes.
Nice one. That's a good one. There was some interesting news item about 2-3 days ago everywhere. Let me read one from the Star. NACADA warns alcohol uptake through rectum is dangerous. The National Authority for the Campaign Against Alcohol and Drug Abuse has warned that the uptake of alcohol through the rectum poses health complications. CEO Anthony Omerikwa said recent media reports show alcohol enemas has allegedly been adopted by Kenyan youths. Alcohol enema, also called butt chugging or boofing, is the introduction of alcohol into the body through the rectum. In a statement, Omerikwa said the trend poses enormous health risks and called for urgent inquiry by relevant stakeholders into the trend. Compared to other methods of consumption, this route is extremely dangerous and poses a significant health risk due to very rapid absorption of alcohol into the bloodstream, he said, in contrast to traditional methods of consumption that allow the body to metabolize and regulate the intake. Alcohol enema bypasses these natural defenses.
Yes.
Ati, what is that?
I'm just surprised that we had to say that it was dangerous in the first place. I mean, one would assume that it would be from the very beginning.
What is that?
And that the fact that you have to say that this is happening, that means one of two things are happening. That there's a rise of this behavior,
Yes.
and that there's ignorance to the fact that it is dangerous.
What is this behavior, first of all? I'm still stuck on that.
Me, I'm dumbfounded.
Chugging from the other side.
You take alcohol. So how do you...
Me, I'm completely
Do you bend
dumbfounded.
over? Does somebody hang you upside down? What's happening here?
Dr. What's happening?
I think this space is pretty new. And the purpose of our news item, an article that we put out there is two. Number one, to diminish the sensationalization of it. If you look at when it broke out in the news and read the after comments, these young people think like it's something that is cool to do. So number one, we wanted to tell them this is not something cool. Number two, secondly and most importantly, is the danger of it. Most of these young people do it to conceal the smell of alcohol. Anecdotal evidence has shown that this has started within schools, so that they go out for a music festival and they soak it in alcohol in tampons and introduce it that way. Many people have come out to say that they've been doing it. And surprising, as far back as 2 years ago, one individual said that they started doing it in 2022, right after towards the end of COVID. And indeed, this is dangerous in so many ways. Number one, the risk of infection. Number two, you don't control the content. You know, as you imbibe, and I'm not advocating for this, but as you drink your beer, other mechanics of metabolism come into play. Number one, you can take so much beer because it fills you up. And that acts as a moderating aspect of the ingestion. Number two, because of the covert way in which these people want to administer this, chances are, and if you look at the demographics of the people who are doing this, chances are they'll look for portable alcohol. And this portable alcohol, as you know, and as the government has been fighting, a big number of them is contraband and illicit. Therefore, you don't even know the content, alcohol content in them. Thirdly, and most importantly, is the fact that when you administer it that way, the effects are faster.
Okay.
And your impairment comes very fast.
Okay.
And it predisposes you to all the dangers that come with immediate inebriation. Yes.
Okay. So that was another question then, Dr. because essentially, we're not just... I'm not saying people are not just doing this because it's cool, but you get inebriated much quicker, and one would assume that it's absorbed into the system, so it hangs around much longer. The feeling of highness essentially is why this is being done.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why it's being done, because of the instant high. Secondly, the demographics of the people who are doing this are people who can't sit on the table and take the alcohol. And if they could do that too, there's a fear of their guardians smelling it off their breath. Yes. So it's a way of administering it without being detected, yes.
So you're saying it's children who are basically doing this. Mostly you'll find it among the younger population.
Yes.
How did it start? Is it common practice globally? I mean,
it is a global phenomena, but in other jurisdictions, they're normally events driven by the psychic and euphoria of groups when they're partying. But in Kenya here, I think we can trace it within the teenage population, and mostly those people who are in schools. In the first instance, and this is a told story about one of the users, as told by the parent, it started when they went out for these school activities. And one of the ways in which the chaperones and the teachers get to know whether these people have taken alcohol is they smell their breath. So this was an innovative way of concealing that breath of alcohol, getting a fast high, because the period of administering this alcohol through the enema is short, so that they can get a quick high out of it. Yeah.
Are there long-term effects?
there are a lot of long-term effects.
Like,
And that is why I agree with you. I mean, some of these long-term effects can only be known if you check yourself into hospital to have them checked. But the biggest effect of this is it leads to addiction, number one. And you know very well addiction is a family disease. The person using the who's addicted and the family who take care of the person. Secondly is the issue of impaired thinking, which gets these people to make decisions that endanger them more. Finally, and most importantly, is the danger of that immediate high. You know, for example, if you are operating machinery, it can cause accidents if you take it up that way.
How did you get to know that this was happening?
Thank you very much. As NACADA, we are present in the social spaces. And our first encounter with this was actually in social media. Then through our teams, our surveillance teams, we further probed to get to the bottom of it. And that is how we came to the realization that this thing truly exists. Yes.
Okay. So usually, like you said, it would be an event. There'll be a concert, something, and that is when it would happen. But obviously, if it's become a worry point here, then you have more folks who are doing it where? From the comfort of their homes, continuing with this, because again, if you're at that age demographic, you're not going to be comfortable with your parents, guardians, knowing that you are, ingesting alcohol. So are we seeing the practice being then taken away from events to other areas where now this continues?
Yes, I'll explain it using the continuum of addiction. How do we get addicted? We don't just wake up one day and decide, today I want to get addicted. There's the experimentation part of it. And what causes addiction is a desire to relive that moment that you encountered when you took your first drink. And the induction spaces are these events. But what happens after the event? You just want to get the same high that you got when you tried it the first time. So it moves from that party environment to the comfort of your room. Yes.
You know what is of interest is, as you're speaking, I was actually looking up something, and the thing that I came across was why the rectum is a problem. You see, the rectum and the colon are full of blood vessels. And the thing about alcohol and why it affects you, that it gets into your bloodstream.
Yes.
But when you ingest it traditionally, what happens is you give other parts of your body the opportunity to do the work they do. Like the liver breaks it down. So the effect is slowed down. But when it's injected directly into your bloodstream, it's fast. And the effects last longer and they're much, much speedier. And the damage, the mitigating circumstances that other part of your body would ordinarily have doesn't exist. But this comes to me with this question. The experimentation bit I understand. Peer pressure and people doing something because others are doing it, I also understand. What I don't understand is that if there is a willingness to experiment with something that is absolutely unconventional, what else are our young people experimenting with? Because this drug is called alcohol. There are other drugs which are not called alcohol, and from what we read have far greater consequences. The aftermath is horrendous. The effects are almost irreversible. This landscape that we've now entered, how vast is this and how dangerous is it?
To tell you the truth is, it's very dangerous. As the government pronounced itself to this, I think alcohol and drug abuse is a third threat to the survival of this country. Not only in its nature as alcohol, but also in its effect of what people who are using these drugs and alcohol would do, both to themselves and to the public. Your question is very pertinent, and it segues into the topic of today about synthetic drugs. alcohol is the most abused drug, but there are other drugs that are equally being abused, and some of these drugs that are abused are available. They are licit and not illicit. And synthetic drugs are those drugs that are created to mimic the effect of actual drugs. Now, you saw a couple of years back that codeine became the drug of choice for very many youth.
Yes.
Because you could buy it over the counter.
The cough syrup.
It's a cough syrup,
Yes.
So within this universe of drugs, there are a couple of things that will determine which drug gets abused. First of all, is geography. If you look at prevalence of alcohol and drug abuse, you find that the leading areas that use illicit drugs is Western Kenya. But that has a cultural component to it, because busa is normally a drink that is culturally made. Yes. If you go to a different part of the community, different social classes, you find that in the urban areas, the youth would prefer to use codeine because it's accessible. They'll go for portable alcohol because they can buy it and conceal it. The government has put in place a very formidable strategy to suppress the supply of drugs within the country. The known drugs, the cocaine, the heroin. And because of this, there's a high proliferation of this synthetic form of drugs. And one of the natural drugs that has become very common is cannabis that is used. Now, why do people go for these drugs? Like I said earlier, once you get inducted to it, there's that feeling that you get that you'll always want to catch up with. And in the process, you get addicted to these substances. And peer pressure is one of the key pull factors in this space. Secondly, the stress levels. And I'm not excusing that this is a solution to relieving stress, but people are pushed into this drug addiction and drug use because of life stresses. And that is why the psychosocial support is very important at the formative ages of these young people, despite the fact that some of these drugs are abused by even the older people. Yes.
A couple of years, when NACADA was established, it was still the bigger threat was alcohol. And then we had cigarette, bangi, and the drugs, what we know as drugs, were not as much. Now we're seeing the trend is growing on the use of synthetic drugs. So what are these synthetic drugs? What are synthetic drugs?
Thank you, Latif. I just want to allay some thought that synthetic drugs are new. And let me start with this old adage that says necessity is the mother of invention. The use, production, use, and distribution of synthetic drugs dates back as far back as the end of the First World War, the Great War, which became the First World War. After the First World War, very many war veterans came back with a lot of injuries. And one of the medications that was used to suppress this pain was morphine. So in the 1920s, we had a lot of what we call the morphine derivatives, which was also synthetic. As you know very well, morphine is a narcotic analgesic, which is used to suppress very severe pain. So within that period, there was an abuse of morphine, and it morphed into very many forms. Yes. It was also very amorphous. You could find it in different forms and flavors in the 1920s. And a lot of work was done to deal with that phenomena. Then in the 80s, we got the fentanyl. Yes, and it was commonly known as the fentanyl analogs, because within that fentanyl consumption, you could find it in very many forms. 10 years later, in 1990, we went into the space of amphetamines. You heard about the crystal meths. Then 30 years later, in 2010, 2020, we have the new psychoactive substances, call them the NPSs. Now, synthetic drugs are made from precursors. And these precursors are normally illicit drugs. Somebody creates a cocktail of codeine, something else, just to mirror the effect of drugs like cannabis. Yes. And broadly, if you look at this, synthetic drugs broadly, because of how they impact the brain receptors, I can broadly put them into categories of cathinoids and cathinoids. Yes, on how they impact the brain. But generally, if I put them within the mainstream of the different types of drugs, I can call them amphetamines, where an example is methamphetamine. We have the opioids, where fentanyl falls, and natural opioids are like heroin and cocaine. Now, why the proliferation of synthetic drugs? Number one, detection. It is very hard to detect synthetic drugs. If you look at, you've gone through these airports before, a sniffer dog will come and sniff out other drugs. Synthetic drugs, the way it is made, it is very hard to detect it. In fact, we need to retrain our dogs on how to detect synthetic drugs. Not forgetting that maybe when they're transiting through the airports, it is illicit substances, which is later mixed in a lab to create the synthetic.
Miko.
Yes.
Okay, sorry, please go ahead.
Thank you. Another thing that makes this thing very elusive is because it's not plant-based. You cannot do supply suppression at source. Today you can go to Afghanistan and scorch earth the poppy fields. For the synthetic, there's no geographical location where you can associate with the source of the synthetic drugs, like you do with cannabis. Today, if you ask somebody where cannabis is grown, they can roughly give you the geographical location. Yes. Thirdly, and most importantly, it's the risk factor that comes with synthetic drugs. And the risk factor is twofold. Number one, the calibration. Because of the mix of so many synthetic components, there's no control on the effect they will have on the receptors and the aftermath of that effect. Secondly, the dangers of other elements that are introduced to the synthetic drugs to make it not only potent and also marketable. Earlier in the year, you saw us fighting against shisha, and I don't want to go into details on that because there's a court matter on it. But it was not the shisha we were fighting. It's the stuff that introduced in those shisha, most of which was synthetic, that portends a risk. And that is why before we get to that space, we need to have standards for such products as shisha. And that's a journey we need to walk as a country.
Indeed.
Yes.
So when you talk about standardization, it's a painstaking process, isn't it? Because here you're looking at the known substances, these ones you already know, the methamphetamines and the fentanyl that we talk about, and all of these things finding their way into the country. If the ones that are here already, and that would be under some kind of legal umbrella, even for those, the standardization of those has not been done to the point whereby it would be okay. And when we talk about illicit alcohol, for example, and that's just under the guise of what is already allowed in the country, what would that process look like to then be able to say, look, class it, and now let that have a standard under which it can or cannot operate? Will it be declared illegal completely? Should it be declared illegal completely? And if you were to go into that process, how then do you ensure that it's actually off the streets? Because black markets thrive in the illegality of something. How then would that happen?
Thank you very much. That is why I'm here. This is part of advocacy. And the fight against illicit alcohol and drugs must be fought by everyone in the country, because this affects every fabric of society. If you look around, at least there's a family that has been affected by this alcohol and drug issue. Now, as a country, we are very clear on what alcohol is licit and what is illicit. Kenya Bureau of Standards has standards for all alcohol that is allowable to be consumed in the country. Unscrupulous business people have opted to bring on board illicit alcohol. Latif, you'll be very surprised that Kenya Bureau of Standards has standards on even some of this traditional brews. It's only that people have not achieved that standard to be able to produce it commercially. Yes. There are so many risks that comes out of producing this illicit alcohol out of the standard. Yes. Yes. And one of the issues why we have standards is to control. And one vital thing is alcohol content. Yes. It must be calibrated. It must be measured.
You must know
the
volume of alcohol in this, what you're taking.
And it must be produced in a certified healthy environment.
What I wonder,
No, go ahead.
What I wonder, Daktari, is like you've explained to us. So, when you're talking about these synthetic drugs, it is drugs that are being manufactured somewhere in a lab. Bring some, legal drugs, come create this concoction and create a new substance that is now becomes the drug, the synthetic drug. Is this being done in Kenya, or are they coming as already manufactured synthetic drugs? Is there production of synthetic drugs in the country?
Thank you very much. Let me go by data that we have. In 2023, at the airport, we confiscated nearly 3 kilograms of methamphetamine.
Last year?
Last year, yes. And we are still in a discovery space of these synthetic drugs. Like I said, it doesn't have a face. And our detection process has even been impeded by what I call poly users. Your average partying individual in Kenya might start with codeine, take some mirror, go into alcohol, and finish with cannabis. It complicates the detection process, such that
this is in one sitting.
In one sitting, I call them poly users.
Okay.
People start with cannabis, they finish with alcohol, and in instances of overdose, it is very hard to detect what the cause of that was, and that is why we are doing a lot of advocacy to our citizens and our young people that the drug space, number one, has been proliferated by unscrupulous business people. So be sure of what you're taking.
Okay.
Even if it comes to alcohol.
So are they being manufactured here, or are they being brought into the country?
most of the synthetic drugs are made from precursors, which are available locally. You see, and people use different precursors to come up with these synthetic drugs that are being used. Now, to give you an example, in Kenya, we've only detected 2 types of synthetic drugs, which is methamphetamine and ecstasy. Yes. It doesn't mean that it is not prevalent because of the challenges I'm telling you about detection. Yes.
So how does the NACADA do? When you say that, there is an emerging threat of these synthetic drugs, but you have challenges of detection, you have challenges of even knowing what kind of precursors have been used and so on and so forth, how does the NACADA know that there is an emerging threat?
You see, the government has adopted a 3-pronged strategy, which is it has adopted from best practice. What I'm doing here is what I call prevention. Latif, the fact that I'm having this conversation with you, telling you that there's people use alcohol through enema, there exist synthetic drugs, is the beginning of the preventive conversation. The second part of it is the treatment part. And that is a space where we do a lot of discovery and data collection. We'll only know the after effect. If you do it very discreetly, we'll only know the after effect or whether you're using these drugs through the medical treatment space.
So do you have that capacity as NACADA to liaise with health centers, health facilities and doctors to know that there's an increasing number of people who are coming to facilities exhibiting these symptoms, and the likelihood is use of synthetic drugs?
Yes.
I mean, what I'm asking is, are you basing this on any empirical data that you have as NACADA that shows there's actually a threat here of people, more and more people, using synthetic drugs?
Yes. We have that capacity and we do it. One of our strong points and one of our mandates is to do research. We have a rehabilitation center in Mombasa called Miritini. And in Miritini, one of the key things we do is we dispense methadone. And methadone is also a synthetic drug, but a good synthetic drug that is administered to people who've been using hard drugs over a long period of time. One of the key uses of methadone is to reduce the withdrawal syndrome and rehabilitate the system out of hard drugs. Now, we collect, I told you about poly users, and that is one of the follies of this research process. Anecdotal evidence shows us that people say they've used this drug on one time or another. For example, the statistics that we had in 203 shows that 0.3% of respondents said that they used opioids. Yes? Where this fentanyl falls in. So we have that capacity, and that is one of the things that we do. And because we've detected the presence of methamphetamine and ecstasy, we've started sensitizing people. It's only through this sensitization that people will come out and say, indeed, we are using this drug. And I can give you an example of one of the respondents whom we talked to. They say they were using something, and it had been concocted by this individual who sells it. We cannot be able to tell whether it's fentanyl. We cannot tell whether it's tramadol. But from the effects of the drugs that they exhibited, we see it's an opioid. And it's not a natural opioid. Yes, like heroin. So those are one of the indicators saying that there's synthetic drugs that are being used. Yes.
Okay. From a law enforcement angle, what's being done? Because there can be the raising of the awareness, the health matters, whereby you shouldn't be chugging anything from that direction. You shouldn't be. And then because you have to now deal with things like addiction and such. But then about the flows of these drugs into society, into communities, from a law enforcement point of view, what is being done to curtail the flow?
Yes. As NACADA, we coordinate a multi-agency team. And one of the key things that is unique to synthetic drugs is that there's no plantation. So what's the next visible thing? It's a lab. We are conducting surveillance to ensure that there are no labs proliferating around. Secondly, as a form of network disruption, we try from a very ethical perspective to conduct a lot of surveillance and intelligence collection to try and work backwards when we apprehend some of these people who are selling these illicit drugs, to try and make sure that we disrupt that network and identify where they're getting these drugs from. We've had a lot of success in the space of cannabis, a lot of success in the other hard drugs like cocaine and heroin, including illicit alcohol.
Do you work with other law enforcement agencies? If we're talking about, the police, for example, because we know for a fact, they can trace a guy in less than 3 hours who was, living on the top of a tree in the middle of wherever. Is it they can find the people who do this? So do you work with them?
Yes, they can find and they do find. Just the other day, we apprehended Mama Ongara, one of our efforts within the space. As NACADA, we have the demand reduction side, which looks at programs, education, advocacy, like I'm attempting to do today. We also have a component of research, where we try to understand the trends within the market. Thirdly, we also have a very strong compliance team that does demand supply reduction. And in that team, it is comprised of officers from NACADA, a very elite team from anti-narcotics unit, with all the capabilities of, just to use your expression, getting that someone on the tree. And we're making a lot of headways in supply suppression. And that is why you see there's a reduction in the traditional drugs. And I started by talking about this adage that says, necessity is the mother of invention. Every time we find a way of suppressing supply on the natural opioids, these people go back and become very innovative on the space of synthetic drugs.
What you say makes sense, and the efforts which are being made by law enforcement, the need to suppress it, they are laudable. But there's a problem here. And I don't think the supply causes it. The demand. What makes the demand possible? Is it that we have very many people now, and we are better informed now, and we know of the multiplicity of what is available? But then why do we need to tickle our brains? Because drugs do just that. They go to the part of your brain that makes you happy. And when you get addicted to that happiness, what we call a high, then these are problems come in. Why do people why is there this great need to be high? You said you have a research component.
Yes.
Because if people don't need to get high, then we don't have a drug problem. We just have people using drugs every once in a while, but we have a problem. Why do people need to get high? What are we running away from?
I'll answer that in two parts. And let me focus for now on the youth. First of all, the sensationalization of drugs is something that has happened for the past 1 century. Yes? It is cool to do drugs. Yes? And the starting point is a first experience. Some people take drugs for the first time out of peer pressure, out of experimenting, and they don't like it. So they don't continue using it. But there are those who get this experience that they'll always yearn to get. And that is what causes addiction. Now, one of the approaches we're using for demand reduction is through advocacy and education to implore upon people to go for rehabilitation. Secondly, psychosocial support. Thirdly, We educate you on the adverse effects of using these drugs. That is the only way we can reduce the demand. Yes.
Can I push a little bit more on that question that CT asked? Because it seems as though there is something that's going to make folks go towards these drugs and to continue in the practice of imbibing. Why? If the research goes to say people are drinking a little bit more because they don't have an adequate source of employment, for example. People are drinking a little bit more because there's a mental health challenge here or there. And it goes across board. Young people, older people. There must be a trigger somewhere that leads to this and then also leads to this coping. Because most times people will use drugs as a coping mechanism. There is an underlying issue that perhaps if that was dealt with, it would make the work on this side easier.
Thank you very much. Social spaces have contributed to this. Push and pulls from celebrities have contributed to this. Let me give you a perfect example of one of the surveillance outcomes that took place a month ago. There are these generational activities that are taking place a month ago.
Generational activities.
Yes. and
Wow.
Nice one.
And one of those activities culminated into a concert.
Yes.
At the heart of the city of Nairobi. My team was conducting surveillance from supply suppression research perspective. And in the process, we were able to interact with some of these young people. Latif, let me tell you, out of the 21 young people who were casually talked to, 16 smoked bang for the first time during these activities. Yes, and half of them said they did it because they were told it will diminish the effect of tear gas. Now, if the feeling they got was that feeling that tickles the dopamine and the receptors in the brain, they'll keep on going back for that experience. So the induction into drugs is a key point that normally determines whether you get addicted or you get out of it. Now, there are other socio-cultural issues surrounding why people get into drugs. I'll take, for example, alcohol. In some parts of the country, you find people getting inducted into alcohol at as young an age as 8 years old. And they get inducted into alcohol not as the end, but as a means to something else. For example, this rite of passage that normally happens in a certain part of the country. During the process, the young people are inducted into alcohol. Some perpetuate that behavior from there going forward. Others are traumatized by the experience and they don't proceed. And evidence has shown when you ask somebody, why don't you take alcohol? They said, my experience when I was 12 years old and I was going through this, it reminds me of that period, a painful past. You see? So there are those socio-cultural things that push this youth towards that end, including the issue of unemployment.
Are we saying that the background, the ecosystems where young people are nurtured in, doesn't contribute significantly to this trigger that we are speaking of? Because if in a home setting, parents are undergoing stress due to the vagaries of the life we live, say in this country, will that not have a very, very direct impact on the children?
Actually, it has a direct impact on the children. The environment, not only the environment, but also genetic predisposition. There's a genetic component into alcohol and drug addiction. Yes. And that is why one of the key preventive measures is that psychosocial support. And I talked about the youth because I purposely left out the parents. They need to lead by example. What the youth see parents doing, they do. Thank you.
Well, Dr. Omerikwa, thank you very much for joining us today. I think, like you said, there is need to have these constant conversations, exploring the various ways in which we need to deal with this issue, because it is an issue in the country. Dr. Anthony Omerikwa is the CEO of NACADA. We've been talking about the emerging threats of synthetic drug use in the country.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.